Hello and welcome. You are listening to Moodily Matters, the podcast that recognizes that your mood matters. Every episode, we talk to a range of amazing guests with experience in some of the top organizations in the world, discussing work life at the crossroads of mood, well-being, and performance. Together, we aim to create better workplaces, one mood at a time. Let's get started with your host, Moodily founder, Erica First.
Hello and welcome. I am Erica First, your host of Moodily Matters. My guest today is the incredible Mona Eshaiker, psychotherapist and DEI organizational consultant. In this episode, Mona and I talk about belonging as a crucial skill for both employees and leaders. This conversation was so rich, layered, and important that this was the perfect discussion to kick off our season with. I hope you find it as engaging as I did. And now on to the show. So hello, Mona. Thank you so much for being here with me today.
Hi, Erica. Thank you. It's great to be here.
Awesome. So why don't you share with us a little bit about who you are and what brought you here today?
Yeah, sure. So my name is Mona Eshaiker. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a licensed therapist. I have a small private practice, but I'm also the strategic advisor and one of the speakers for the Rise Journey.
Awesome. And so you said you're a therapist, but you've also done, you're a consultant. Can you tell us a little bit about your career journey and how things have evolved over time?
Yeah, definitely. It meandered, which I think that's life, and it pivoted during the pandemic, which I know a lot of people had a bit of a career shift during that time. So my background is in mental health. So I work mainly in community mental health programs. Eventually became a supervisor. And then in 2017, the mental health tech world was just starting. And so I kind of jumped in because it was exciting. The pay was really great, much better than a community mental health provider benefits. So I thought that was exciting. It was a remote position. And when I was there, I was there during the pandemic, and I got really burnt out. So I ended up leaving that company, and I was good friends with the HR woman there, Jess Osro, who is one of the founders of the Rise Journey. So she brought me in. So it is related, and especially during my career, because of my background, right? I'm a woman, I'm a person of color, and I'm queer. I was a lot of times tapped into doing education trainings. Again, sometimes volunteers, sometimes voluntold. And so I was sort of carrying that weight a lot, which I think was ultimately, it's all very positive because I have that experience now. But during the pandemic, I was tapped in a lot because there's now this growing attention to disparities. And so I was doing a lot of that training. And I think that just was like the straw that just burnt me fully out. And so now I do more of the consulting, and now I have a private practice, which feels very, very aligned.
Awesome. And can you tell us, I mean, you kind of tapped on it a little bit, but tell us a little bit about your personal and your professional mission.
Yeah, I love that question. So in general, due to my own personal experiences, I got to see kind of firsthand, and I'm sure you did too, of what works and what doesn't work in a workplace, and how crucial even just a company culture is to the employee experience. And so my personal professional mission is to improve the workplace culture. Especially, we spend so much of our times and our lives in our career. So why not make that as healthy as possible? Because it does also increase our quality of life as well. I don't think those are two separate things. And I think sometimes we like to isolate those, our personal lives, and then now we're an employee, and those are fully connected. And so kind of improving it one person at a time.
Okay. And what does well-being mean to you?
Yeah, I think I like how you ended it with "to you," because it is truly different person to person. For me, it's been slowing down and getting really real about who I am and what do I want to do with my time. I think a lot of people have this experience. Either, I'm a child of immigrants and a woman. And so a lot of times all of my decisions have been externally focused. So I'm making decisions based on maybe what would appear great and good for people outside of myself. And it works, which is so unfortunate. And I think that's why I kind of moved along in my career, but ultimately it led to my own demise. It led to my own burnout. And so once that happened, I got quiet and I got clear with myself, and I realized, this is not the work I want to do. It didn't align with my ethics, didn't align with my integrity. And so for me, wellness has been at every point in every decision as much as possible. And I'm not perfect at this by any means, but it is slowing down and really getting quiet and asking myself, is this something I want for myself? And now I'm making decisions based on that. And that's been like a huge game changer.
Okay. And that's really interesting because we're going to start talking about your skill in a second, but I think there's an interesting segue there because you were doing certain things to be part of a group or be accepted by what was considered sort of the status quo, but it was making you not feel like yourself. So you were belonging to a group, but not necessarily belonging to yourself. And, and so I think that's just an interesting first step, is that, perhaps in order to feel this, and of course we'll be talking about belonging in a second, it's possible that the first step is really getting clear and right with yourself and understanding what it is that you actually need in order to be able to articulate that.
Yes, I love that. You kind of blew my mind a little bit, because it's true though, right? Like if we're constantly making decisions based on sort of external factors, I lost touch with myself. And I do see this with other people as well. I mean, it's like people pleasing behavior at the end of the day, ultimately. And so, yeah, I'm a good employee. I'm saying yes. I'm doing it with a smile. I'm being overly pleasant. And I'm like fully like not belonging to myself. It did totally feel like I was kind of giving myself up, and it's a performance piece too. So then I'm also feeling inauthentic. And I think that's where a lot of that like ethical dilemma comes in, of like, wait, who am I? What am I? What am I doing? And that could really, that impacts our mental health. And I think I was really feeling lost, kind of at that pandemic peak, the mental health crisis. I think everybody was going through.
Yeah.
But yeah, I love that. Thanks for framing that.
No, my pleasure. And actually, well, because I know it so well, because it's one of the cornerstones of burnout, is that you don't know who you are anymore in yourself, or also in relation to the group that you're in. So it's one of the things that creates the tension that causes emotional labor, which causes you to eventually not have enough energy to even get up out of bed and face it. Okay. So since I've like spoiled what we're going to talk about today, tell us a little bit about the skill that you're going to be discussing with us.
Yeah, sure. So I bring the mental health and psychology lens to human resources. And a lot of my work does focus on belonging. And I do a lot of research on this subject, and belonging keeps coming up as this cornerstone. What I've heard this term before, that we're in the golden era of HR data, which sounds so boring, but it's because we have so much data now. Now we have all this like from attrition, retention data that's been populated across companies. So now we get to see, it's not just about having a diverse workforce. Right now we could have like the data that shows, having a diverse workforce is literally correlated to innovation, right? Because now you have diversity of thought, but it doesn't end there. In order to tap into diversity, your diverse talent is belonging. What's the point if you could have the most diverse workforce, but if somebody does not feel like they belong there, they're not going to bring their full selves forward. Especially talking about what we were just talking about, which is like being your authentic self. A lot of times we feel like we have to sort of overperform in this way in order to be accepted. But that does not do anybody any favors, because then we're more likely to play small, kind of go along with the crowd. If there is something that, like an issue or concern that comes up that you don't agree with, you're less likely to share a concern because you want to be part of a group. And a lot of this, it's so interesting because a lot of this, and this is where the psychology background comes in, because a sense of belonging is a basic fundamental human drive that for social bonding, right? And so it is
For
natural.
survival.
So it's survival, right? Because I want to, if I want, going back to if I want to survive, you're more likely to survive in a group. And so we have these learned behaviors. So it's not a bad thing. And I know a lot of people like self-blame. Oh, why do I do try not to do that, because then
it's literally in our brains that we've inherited from thousands and thousands of years of evolution.
Yes, exactly. And so that's why in order to do this work, it really requires kind of pausing and then noticing your behaviors, because what diversity of thought is literally having the most varied backgrounds of people sharing their input. That way, all of our blind spots and all of our possible concerns get covered. And so you're not doing anybody any favors if you're going along with the crowd, even though there's something ingrained with that. And I think certain people kind of fall into that more than others.
And what do you mean by, like, if we had to put a working definition for this conversation, what do we mean by belonging?
Oh, like, how do we define belonging?
Yeah.
It's truly like a sense of acceptance. So you're not tolerated, not even accepted, but you're actually like celebrated. Your difference is celebrated. And I like to zoom out when I think about belonging, because I like to think about sort of the history of diversity, equity, inclusion in the workplace. And this is very US centric. So I apologize. I know sometimes I just like pull data from the US, but I think it is interesting because we have, the mid 1960s. I think it was 1964. We have the Desegregation Act. Before 1964, workplaces were segregated. You could not even enter an establishment if you were a person of color, specifically if you're a Black person, let alone be able to work there. So that all changed. So you could imagine maybe in the late 60s, now, Black people of color are allowed to enter workplaces, but are they getting hired there? Right. In the 70s, now we have federal laws. So now, okay, sure, the doors are open. You could apply there, but were they getting the jobs? 80s, okay, now people of color and now women too, right? Okay, you're getting the jobs, but how are you treated? Was your difference treated as an asset, or was it treated as, something that is bringing the team down? And then in the 90s, kind of thinking that, this is I'm 35. My dad grew up during segregation in the US. So he grew up in a culture where it was accepted to discriminate people. And so, he's a boomer, so he's almost at retirement. But these are people who've set the stage, who created the companies that we work in today. So a lot of that culture kind of gets ingrained. Right. And so now we're saying, okay, it's not just about diversity, because what's the point of having diversity if there's no place to if you don't feel like you belong there, right? If people are looking at you like, your differences, you don't know what you're talking about, right? People are questioning your judgment. And now we're getting to see, no, belonging is a vehicle of inclusion. You can't have one without the other. We need an environment where people feel welcomed and comfortable enough to share. And I think a lot of us have this experience. I know I've had this experience of coming into a workplace. Oh, do I belong there? A lot of times I'm like the only one in a work environment. So I'm already like, oh, do they like me? Am I going to be I'm just going to be a little cautious. I'm going to kind of play small a little bit. And that's sort of where it comes, because belonging has to be actively cultivated. It can't be passive, because the absence of belonging could feel kind of exclusive, because we're more likely to stay kind of in our like groups, which is also very much a psychological evolutionary function.
Yes, it is also ingrained in our brains to gravitate towards people who reflect us aesthetically, visually, but also from a lifestyle, and obviously because there's shared experience. So, if I have a code word for something that I'm passionate about, people who know me will get that immediately, whereas someone else I will have to explain. And so there's more work involved in connecting with people who don't have sort of the shared experience there. So thinking about belonging as a skill, because there's actually sort of multiple ways we can come into it, because there is, and I do have sort of a provocative question I want to ask you in a second. There's multiple ways in, because obviously there's the ability to create a workplace that is accepting. There's also the question of And so therefore, what do managers need to know and to do, and how do they create a space where people can feel shared and whatnot? But also for us as individuals, what do we need to do to make sure that we are showing up, or that we're creating a space that's open for others? And I'm going to write down my provocative question for a little bit. I'll let you answer that first.
Yeah, don't forget that. I'm so curious. I like the way you frame that, because company culture is a two-way street, right? It absolutely takes sort of your environment, your supervisor, the director, right, the CEO, your coworkers, but there is something internal, right? So we can't like just sort of negate that doesn't exist, because we're bringing our, I hate to call it a baggage, but we are bringing our baggage to every workplace that we enter. And so if we had an experience of being unappreciated or belittled, or, if we weren't able to move up, or if we had a bad relationship with the boss, or if we had a toxic boss, I mean, that happens. This is why the trauma-informed lens comes in, because we're bringing that to our workplace. So a lot of times we feel we're not sure who we can trust. And so a lot of times we do kind of hold back a little bit, or we could misread a situation. I mean, also just thinking about stress and burnout, which also impacts minority folks and just underrepresented folks at higher rates. When you're feeling a higher level of stress, you're more likely to misperceive people's behaviors as threatening. Our threat perception gets impacted. It's our amygdala gets activated in that state. So again, it's removing the blame, there's removing the judgment, but it's helpful to be aware of this, right? So when we're feeling stressed, we're more likely to sort of project that. So again, it's helpful just to separate fear from fact, and show up, right? Sometimes it just takes a commitment to yourself. Continue speaking after an interruption, right? There's little things that you can do throughout the day. Give feedback. I know that one's really tough for a lot of people. But a lot of times your supervisor truly just doesn't know what they don't know. And so sometimes providing the feedback that, hey, in our team meetings, we're only hearing from two people, maybe we could formulate it in a way that everybody gets a chance to speak, right? Something as simple as that could really make a huge difference for you and for your colleagues as well.
Okay. So I think that's interesting. So first of all, to be and this is obviously something that speaks straight to my heart, is to be very conscious of your own emotional state and the mood you're in, and are you reading the situation objectively, or are you looking at it through the lens of, as you said, past trauma, past experiences, or even coming in certain cases, like with a prejudgment of how things are going to unfold. So I would say maybe because I'm writing a little list, maybe the first thing is to try and stay in as objective and emotional space as possible, without assuming, without judging, and without sort of prejudice or prediction on what's going to happen on all sides of the tape. I mean, that's just good practice for everybody, all day, every day. So, and then the second, I really like that idea of don't assume that people know what they don't know. And I think that, because that's really like when we talk about belonging in very multicultural, diverse environments, we can assume, why did they do that? And it's like, well, they come from a completely different culture, completely different experience with totally different rules. And so there has to be an exchange of, well, I saw it from this perspective. Explain to me from your perspective how you saw it. So in order for there to be that common ground, there has to be an exchange of information so everybody can get aligned. But first, you have to be willing to actually take the step to have that conversation in an appropriate and polite manner. We don't have to be rude.
It doesn't have to be rude. And I think if we frame it as difficult conversations, especially feedback and just sharing your perspective, but it's not difficult. I mean, it's difficult because we don't have the skills. Nobody teaches us.
That's exactly the point.
That's the point, right? And everybody's coming from, and I like the way you said that, people are coming from their own fishbowl, right? Their own set of understanding. So if I'm okay, so this is a real life example. Somebody in a workplace who just speaks over other people. That used to be my pet peeve, and it would kind of trigger me because then I'm like, so used to being kind of silenced in a lot of ways. So I'm like, here's this person again, and I'm going to make assumptions based on their maybe race and gender of why they're doing this. And then I'm going to do this confirmation bias where I'm going to think of things in the past that confirm this belief of this person being rude or, insensitive or not conscious of other people. But the minute I talked to that person, I learned so much and I was fully wrong because when I shared, hey, when you talk over, like I get shut down and, it doesn't give me a chance to like finish an idea. And it takes a lot for me to just like speak unprompted. So it throws me off a little bit. And they're like, I'm so sorry. I didn't realize that. They're like, the way I grew up in a family with lots of loud
Right.
people, and you have to fight to share your idea and it's interrupting people. But there's this assumption that they were making that if I interrupt you, you could just chime back in and you won't be bothered about it. Right. So these are two different cultures coming together. Nobody was right and nobody was wrong. Everybody was acting appropriate based on their context.
Right.
But it's where we fall into a trap is when we project what we think that means. And then all of a sudden this person becomes this one-dimensional bad person when that's fully not accurate. Because if I think of this person as a kind and conscientious person, I could just as easily go back into my memory bank and find all the times that they were kind and conscientious.
Right.
So yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's so interesting, especially with the workplaces that we have now. It's a lazy response to be like, asshole.
Yeah. It's easy and lazy. Yeah.
Now, it might be the right answer, but you only know that after you do the due diligence and come, because I think it's a rare occasion if someone were to come up to you and be like, can I speak please don't take this the wrong way, but it really upsets me when you talk over me, as opposed to be like, why do you talk over me all the time? Like there's a proper way. And I find that all difficult conversations start with saying, I feel, not you done, but here's how I experience this. And then see what happens from there. Obviously if they laugh in your face and you're like, that's stupid. You're like, okay, maybe we've come to one conclusion, right? But if you don't have the conversation, obviously you never discover that. So, yes. The idea of belonging from both sides takes work and input from everyone, from the one person to understand, but also on the other to take the initiative.
Yes.
So what else do you think is involved in creating a sense of belonging, either from a manager's point of view or from the employee's point of view?
Yeah, I have a few thoughts on that. I think it starts from orientation when they first get hired. So making an effort when somebody is new to welcome them, like that alone, it's so low lift, but it's really impactful. So if it's a remote environment, sending a Slack individually and welcoming them. If it's in person, it's kind of tricky because we do that thing where, again, it's human nature, where we tend to gravitate towards our like group because we get that sense of camaraderie, safety, comfort. And we sometimes go into tight circles. So as much as possible, opening up the circle. And if somebody's, having an open way so people could kind of join into a circle. So those are some basic things. As a manager, there's almost this assumption if somebody's quiet, they have nothing to share. I would really interrogate that thought. Because everybody has something important to share. And if somebody's silent, that actually is more of a signal that the environment is so where they don't feel comfortable sharing. It could be due to something that you're doing. It could not be. It could also be sort of cultural. It could also be somebody's baggage from past work environments. And this is what the research shows, as much as possible, hearing from everyone almost as equally as possible. To me, that feels very simple to do, but as somebody who used to be a manager and manage a team, it is really hard, especially in team meetings, to organize and to make sure we're staying on track, but also hearing from everyone equally. So there's a lot of really cool ways to do this. One, and I've seen this in some companies where in every team meeting, everyone has equal time to share, like period. That's the way, that's the expectation. Everybody knows. And so people prepare. So it could be, what's one good thing, maybe what's one concern. So already we're inviting people to talk about concerns, because that's the other thing is people sometimes only want to bring in good news because that's part of belonging. We want to feel, that we're contributing positively, but we also want to carve the space out to share concerns because we want to get ahead of those as well. So it could be, taking literally equal turns in a conversation. There's also this thing called silent brainstorming that's getting really popular, which I really, really love. Whereas instead of group brainstorming, which by the way, research shows group brainstorming is ineffective because it's just one person shares an idea and everybody kind of talks about that one idea and we kind of miss everybody's train of thoughts. So silent brainstorming, you have a question or a prompt. You give everybody maybe 5 minutes of silent brainstorming on their own, like cameras off, mics off, which is great, by the way, for introverts and people who maybe are less likely to talk off the cuff in a meeting. And then after the 5 minutes, and then everybody goes around and kind of shares their ideas. And then as a manager, you kind of take note and have action points based on that. So there's kind of like cool ways. And I think that takes the pressure off of you as a manager, right? If you want to hear I think your role as a manager is not to have all the answers. Your role as a manager is to tap into everyone's genius and create an environment where everybody's able to shine and bring their best foot forward. So it has to be intentional again. And I think I hear this from a lot of managers who are like, well, I hired them for a reason. I don't need to do all this sort of extra work to show that like I appreciate them and they belong. But it's truly not a given. So we really want to hear from other people. And then now I have to add another thing. If somebody does share an idea that you as a manager are like, no, that's bonkers. Like there's no way that's going to work. Don't shut them down because you could be wrong. Information is moving so rapidly. They could actually have information or an idea that you didn't think of. So whenever we shut down an idea, and I know sometimes we have a short fuse or we're feeling stressed out that day and we're just like, no, that's not going to work. Let's move on. Don't do that, right? Even if you don't think it's going to work, be curious and ask them what their thought process is around them and allow them to experiment. Allow them to, if it fails, let it fail, because it's actually a good thing if it fails, because now you're getting closer to the solution. You got to roll out something. And so, be open to people to experiment, and you might not always be right. So if somebody is bringing up something that you don't agree with, still allow them to go forward with that.
Okay. So one of the things, and I love the idea of, in the hearing from everyone, like to assign equal tasks, even if, because you were saying the one good thing, one bad thing. And so, I'm going through my past teammates, to see how one person would have responded to that, the other. The other thing I was thinking is also like in the Senate hearings, right? Each person has a specific amount of time. Like you have 5 minutes to speak. And after that, you're done, because you can always get that one person whose one good thing lasts 45 minutes.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yes. So I think that's interesting. And it feeds into one thing that I'm really noting, which is aside from being listened to, heard. So part of belonging is being heard, is a sense of equality, that there needs to be sort of a common playing ground against which, or at least, equal opportunity.
Yes.
To express. You may not, yours may not be the thing that wins or whatever that gets taken forward, but you had the opportunity to express yourself and be heard without being dismissed. And that already in and of itself creates a sense of, okay, psychological safety, which is ultimately what I'm assuming where the belonging ladders up to, is that you feel psychologically safe to express yourself, to fail even,
Yes.
And to be yourself. Now, I want to come back to, this is my provocative question from before. So now there is be yourself and there is be yourself, right? Obviously, we have our demographic things that come off in, even in terms of introduction, like names, pronouns, ethnicities, sexual orientation, et cetera, et cetera. So that's like one set of who you are. But then there's also, there's like a lot more, right? How much of ourselves is it because, some people maybe are more extra, some people are a little less extra, some people, some people are introverts. How much of ourselves is it appropriate to bring in the workplace? Because it is still, and I think this is the thing we need to remember, it's still a place of work, right? We're not talking about becoming best friends. It's still a professional environment. We have goals and objectives to get done. And of course, we want to be treated properly while we're there. But are we trying to create a family? Or so how does that relationship go?
That's right. I mean, that's a good question. I wouldn't want anybody to dampen who they are. If and I think this is another thing we're just talking about culture. I think a lot of people get labeled as being too much, who are from a very specific culture. And I'm not sure if that's helpful. And if someone's introverted, for example, I do believe that they should be allowed to be introverted. I do think that they should be allowed to, take quiet time alone so that they could ponder ideas and come back as a group. So it is a good question. It's almost like philosophical. Is it possible to create a work environment where everybody can truly just be fully their authentic selves? And in that, are people how is that going to impact the relationship? Right. Because at the end of the day, we're at a company and we have a job to do. I almost feel like if you're not,
I'll give you a dumb example, right? Let's say I live for death metal. And so part of my creative process is to listen to death metal as loud as I possibly can, which you can hear through my headphones while I'm at work. Now, do I have a right to be my full self, or am I being intrusive? Because obviously it bothers other people. Where's the
line? Yeah. I mean, ultimately it's a group of people, and if we want cohesion, we don't want to disturb other people. So we want to limit that as much as possible. Gosh, it's such a good question, because I do think they should be allowed to be listening to the music that helps promote their best working environment. But if that is disturbing, I mean, maybe there has to be a third solution, which is, maybe go to a more quiet part of the office where there's not a lot of people, or now they have those, a lot of companies have those booths of one where you could just shut the door and kind of, listen to your headphones. So I do think there is a way that I like to be a little bit optimistic about it. And I like to think that it is possible, where people could do that as much as possible. But I do think it does take that level of communication skill, because what I could see happening is that person listening to their you say death metal or heavy metal?
Death metal.
They're going hard, and the people around them are rolling their eyes and not saying anything. And I think that's a lot of times what ends up happening. And then we'll do the labeling thing again, where that person's a jerk and inconsiderate or a weirdo or whatever. And so I think if we want to actually embrace this idea where everybody's are free to be their authentic selves, then I think with that we need to bring in the skills of communication. We need to bring in the skills of not labeling, of accepting yourself and accepting other people. Because I think without those other things, I could see it kind of going a little bit south. So those are my.
For sure. But I love animals. Dog barking activates something in my brain that makes me crazy, and I have to get away from the dog. I mean, they're beautiful while they sleep. I have a cat who I live for, but if a dog barks, it makes me insane. And so I've been looking at these places that have, bring your dog to work. And so this is a place that I could never work at. And so, is that discriminatory?
Mm-hmm. And especially if that person, let's say, has a disability where they are bringing their maybe emotional support animal to work, right, is a accommodation. Well, that's an interesting question, right? Because then if somebody being their authentic self is actually negatively impacting somebody else, I think there is something and I think it's worth mentioning. I don't think it's just sort of all or nothing. I do think there has to be this sort of third solution that every situation kind of could fall back on. But again, I think it does take a level of bringing that up again, not sort of silently being that dog is driving me crazy and now I have to leave or work early and now I'm resentful and because we could go down that route. Yeah.
Because that's what ends, and this will bring me to my next question, which is what's the, like when there is no belonging, what is the downside here? And it creates, as we said, when people don't feel heard, when they don't feel respected, when they feel actually disrespected because that person is intruding on their space or not, it creates a really hostile environment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. In the absence of belonging. Well, it could look like a few things. So one could be an environment that is equitable. So I'll just sort of one end of the spectrum. It is equitable, but there's no active belonging. So nobody's bringing you in. Everybody's sort of expected in team meetings just to share at will. And so there isn't that sort of intentional thing carved out. In those spaces, again, if somebody has experienced discrimination and not belonging in their past, they might project that. So they might think, like everybody's in their tight groups, nobody is slacking me. I'm sort of feeling a bit isolated. And now because maybe I'm, somebody who is different, I'm already feeling alienated. And so that person is less likely to share, right? They're less likely to feel safe. And so they're going to, it's going to impact their engagement at work. Of course, it's going to impact their engagement at work if you are truly questioning if you belong there or not, because it could feel, again, exclusive, right? We could misinterpret things. So that's sort of like one end of the spectrum. There's another end, it's called an authoritarian hierarchy. It's this type of leadership. It's like very antiquated. It's this old school type of leadership where one person's in charge, they're always right, and they get the final say. And everybody below them, like under seniors, their opinions literally don't matter because maybe they don't have like that role as a leader. And these are extreme examples where people, if somebody makes a mistake, they're ridiculed. Maybe it's similar to that work environment where you don't get a desk and there's a little bit of humiliation. How can that work? I think people, again, depends on that person, but I do feel like it's going to impact the way that you're motivated and how you show up at work. If you don't feel like your company cares about you, or if you don't matter, then why would you bring your best self forward? It would make sense that you would just kind of do the bare minimum to get that paycheck and kind of leave and check out. So I think it does impact, and the research does show it does impact engagement, and it impacts motivation, and the way you perceive your workplace as like a great place to work or not.
Yeah. And there's also counterproductive work behaviors where you start subconsciously trying to sabotage the work that you're doing, where it's like, all right, you know what? I could make that phone call, which would resolve this problem, but I'm not going to because nobody's.
Yeah. Passive aggression, which stems from feeling powerless, right? So if you don't feel like you have no one's taking you seriously, you don't have any power, any say, your ideas get shut down, then yeah, there is a way that subconsciously we'll do this thing where we're going to like try to, make ripples where we can. And sometimes it will be negative behavior if that's a way that we could feel a sense of control or power in the workplace. Absolutely.
Okay. So I think we've kind of done this, but what are your top actionable tips that people can put into place in their own lives? And I would say, let's do one as like some tips for the employee and then some tips for managers, even though I feel like a couple we've already done.
Mm-hmm. So for leaders, I'd say one of the biggest actionable tips would be kind of a mindset shift, which is thinking about your employees as a leader themselves and thinking that everybody has something to share, kind of without exclusion, right? Everybody has something important. And so it's your job to tap into that and create those environments. So I think that's like a really big one because especially, and I've had experience of being a manager thinking that I had to always have the answers, and that is a lot of pressure, and it's just not realistic either. And so you definitely want to, your team got hired for a reason. So you definitely want to tap into everybody. So I think that mindset shift is a really big one. And when you think of everybody as a leader, I think then you kind of entrust in them, then they trust themselves, and then they're able to kind of show up and bring their creative selves or innovative selves, their authentic selves. So I would say that would be a big one for managers. And of course, we talked about sort of carving out literal space and time in meetings, make it look like Senate or Congress, like your time is up. I've seen a manager do that, by the way. Like he literally had a timer because there was one person in the group in particular who could just tangent forever. And it was just got so disruptive. But we appreciate that person, right? Because that's who they are too. So having a timer was this sort of like creative solution. It tend to work.
I love a timer also because if you know you only have, because I'm a talker. And so if I knew I only had 5 minutes, I would really cull my thinking to make sure that I said what I wanted to say.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, exactly. And it works. It can work for everyone. I like that. Because then you get to pace yourself and then maybe just sort of highlight the most important things so they don't get lost. And for employees, I mean, I guess it depends on who you are. I would say as much as possible. You know what? I'm going to say this because the number one way we could mitigate unconscious bias is to literally get to know somebody who's different from us. It sounds very simple, but it's because it is our human nature to gravitate towards people who we have shared identities because we get that sense of comfort and safety automatically. We tend to not know people who are different from us. And that really stunts our growth. It stunts our capacity to empathize. It stunts our capacity to like be competent towards other people and other cultures. And so I would say that would be my number one thing for all employees is to get to know somebody who's different from you. You will always learn something. And the saying goes, what we don't know, we fear. And so that's just a really good way to sort of add information into your database, because a lot of the unconscious bias comes from these, it's called category activation. Again, it's a social science psychology term, is especially when we are like rushed, we tend to fall back on these preconceived notions that were built to it from our what we heard in our home growing up, what we see on the TV, what we heard culturally. And so that's not it. That could be fine if we just expand our category. So the more we get to know different people, and that could be in the workplace. So make an effort to get to know someone different. Social media, if you're on social media, I think that's such, again, like a low lift, high impact way to like follow people from different parts of the world. Just being curious, right? Just see how people live, get a better understanding. And that way you have you're expanding your understanding of people, then you're less likely to fall back on these unconscious biases that we do sometimes.
Yeah, it's funny. I did a presentation for a company about cultural diversity because they're big international, and we sort of looked at it from a scientific point of view and how and why stereotypes exist, and that they actually do exist because of a survival instinct that we have inherited from ancestors, but that can be broken, and it's broken through contact. And one of the things that we were looking at was toilets. And this was quite funny because it was like a huge presentation, very formal situation. I had like 10 different toilets, right? And I was like, if I took this idea to say, like, you grew up with this looking like a toilet, they grew up with this looking like a toilet, and they grew up with this looking like a toilet. All three of you have completely different images ingrained in your head. So when you talk about it, there's gonna be different things. So, and so to me, the cultural curiosity is really one of the first steps to helping unlock that sense of belonging, because we ultimately find that we have more in common than we don't.
Exactly. Exactly.
It's just the package that our needs and values are wrapped up in looks different. So like the clothes are different, but the inside is the same. And so once you peel away the layers, that becomes apparent.
Yes, 100%. I can't overstate that enough. And I think as a therapist, because I've worked with so many different populations, I could fully like say that with confidence that we truly just want the same things in life, right? We want health, we want wellness, we want happiness, we want love.
Our kids to be happy and healthy.
And I love the way you say it's just packaged a little differently. And I think the unfortunate part is when we see a different package presented to us, we have this tendency to criticize or judge when it's different than us. And I don't know where that comes from. And I wonder if there is I'm sure there's data based on that.
Well, the heuristics are simple conditioning. And the irony, and this was part of the presentation that I did, is the irony is that your heuristics and your judgments and your pre-existing prejudice exist to allow you to belong to the community within which you were born. Because obviously, if your family of origin or your culture of origin, you were different, then you were removed, right? So that's why you accept what you're raised with. And then as you get older and the brain is fully processed, you start to be like, do I? Some of us question, some of us don't. But I think one of the things that I find is really fundamental also to opening this conversation is first being accepting of the fact that every single one of us has stereotypes, and we didn't necessarily do it on purpose, but they exist.
Yes.
And we can't have a conversation at all until we're willing to admit that, yes, that exists. I'm going to actively tell my brain that maybe what I think I know is not 100% accurate, and go look for a more accurate answer.
Yes, exactly. I like that you said that. And we will never reach a 0 point where we're never not racist or making biases or I heard somebody use the the standard deviation curve in statistics where we'll never, the more we educate and get to know the people, our instances of offending or judging people will never hit 0.
Yeah.
And I think
we can flatten it.
About that. Yes, we can flatten it, right? Because there are actual tools and techniques. And I like that. Again, I feel like that's very uniting and humbling. We're kind of all in this together.
I think that's the first point, is that just as, someone's judging me and I'm judging them, it's that we both come with this brain that operates in a way that we have absolutely no idea about. We don't even know why we do the things that we do. And that these judgments that exist, these snap judgments that exist, were there so you would feel comfortable within your family of origin, but they are not necessarily the universal truth.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, Mona. So tell everybody where they can find you, your work links, your social links, whatever you'd like to share on how they can learn more about you and your work.
Perfect. Yeah, I'll share a few things. So my personal website is monalmft.com, and that stands for Licensed Marriage Family Therapist. I'm also at Mona LMFT on Instagram. And then so I'm an advisor for the Rise Journey. So you could just Google the Rise Journey. And I wish I knew, I'm sure the website is therisejourney.com, but I'm 95% sure. So maybe just Google the Rise Journey and check out their work, because we're doing some really great stuff.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being here with me. This was an amazing conversation.
Yeah, likewise. I had a lot of fun.
And hope we can talk again soon.
Yes, same. Thank you.
Thanks so much for tuning in to this episode of Moodily Matters. If you're enjoying the show, please feel free to rate, subscribe, and leave a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. We really appreciate that effort, and we'll catch you in the next episode of Moodily Matters.